All right, good evening, everyone. Erev Tov. Welcome to Echoes of Eden on this Monday night. Thanks for coming to this different location. Not quite as cozy as the chapel, but it will do for us this evening. Next week, God willing, the plan is we'll have class and we will resume back at the chapel, same time, same place. And then we will have one more class. So that'll be next week's the 12th, then we'll have 19th. And then we will be off a couple of weeks because, again, God willing, part of that time I will be in the land of Israel. And there, as well as just activities going on. So we will have class next week and the week after, but I will keep you updated on those things. So let's get started with the blessing before the study of Torah. Let's pray. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'asok b'divrei Torah. Blessed are you, Lord God, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments, has commanded us to be immersed into the words and the matters of Torah. Amen. All right, so this evening we're going to be looking at the portion that is known as Vayigash. That's the wrong one. Getting my parashots mixed up. Vayishlach. Vayishlach. We're going to be looking at Vayishlach, which is the 8th division of the Torah, and that covers Genesis chapter 32, verse 3, and goes through chapter 36, verse 43. So basically Genesis 32 through 36. This passage or this portion is pretty well known. So last week we looked at the story of Jacob's ladder and so forth, which is also pretty well known. And this week is Jacob struggling and wrestling with a man, as the Torah calls the individual. But clearly we also know it's more than just a man by the renaming. Lots of tradition and debate. Is it an angel? Is it a messenger from God? Is it God himself? Who and what is this being that Jacob wrestles with, including the angel of Esau's angel, and that it was indicative of spiritual warfare and so forth. And all of those have a lot of merit to them. And in fact, if you look in your handbook and you look in that Hebraic toolbox, you will see that one of those tools is that in Hebraic thought, it's not about either or, it's not about which one is correct, it's about how all of them are actually true. And then as you have all of these simultaneous truths, well, how do they actually synthesize and form a much bigger and deeper concept? So this evening, I thought when we get to that time to talk about Jacob and becoming Israel and so forth, I wanted to do something similar to what I did last week, and that is go a little deeper, go beyond. I mean, you can get you a Bible commentary from a bookstore. You can Google the common understandings of things. I would assume you're in Echoes of Eden because you want more than that, and you know that there's more than that. And so I want to give you the more than. All right, and then trust you. You already know Israel means struggle with God, right? You already know that. Well, you may not know the 7 other things the name Israel means and so forth. So I want to go maybe where you haven't gone before. So that's where we're going to be headed. But really, what's the whole portion about? What's the whole portion of Vayishlach all about? So in this portion, Jacob actually makes it back to the Holy Land, right? He makes it back to the land promised to his grandfather Abraham and to his father Isaac after a 20-year stay in Haran, right? Because he had that 7 year, but I'm going to leave early kind of deal with his uncle Laban. And so after a 20-year hiatus, he makes it back to the Holy Land, and then he sends out messengers. And again, 2 understandings of this are these physical kind of messengers, kind of like Jacob, because he was wealthy and had lots of livestock and so forth, which would have meant as a nomad, he would have had essentially a private militia that would protect that. He kind of had traveling security. Did he send out like that kind of messenger to Esau? Or did he send out, which it's literally in the Hebrew malach, did he send out angels, like literal angels, spiritual angels, signifying again that the battle that was really being waged here with Jacob and Esau was a much higher level battle being represented, and good versus evil, light versus darkness. Jacob having this understanding that this is going to require spiritual warfare. And did he summon his angels and his protectors to go and have interaction with those of Esau? And again, the commentaries give both understandings, and it's not an either or. But he hopes to reconcile with his brother Esau. But his messengers come back and report that his brother is on the warpath and that he has 400 armed men. And so Jacob, well, he does what you might think. He prepares, all right? And this is important. We kind of note this, what's happening on the Peshat, because later when we talk about it in depth, when we go into the Darash and the Sod, it's important that we remember this detail. He begins to do very practical things, right? He begins to prepare for war. He sends gifts to Esau, extra large gifts consisting of hundreds of heads of livestock to try to flatter him and appease him. And he prays, right? So he knows he's about to hit into this conflict, so he does practical things. He gets ready for the conflict in a variety of ways. And so that night, Jacob ferries his family and his possessions across the Yabach River, or the Jabbok River in most English translations, but I don't like the J in English for Hebrew names because there's no J in Hebrew and there's no J sound in Hebrew. It just so the Yabok River, and he remains behind. So he sends his family across the river. Now, you're good Hebraic thinkers. You know, anytime in the Bible when people are traveling and they're going from one place to another, it's not just a physical move, but it's something bigger than that. And when they're crossing over, right, something else is happening. And so his family crosses over. His family makes it safely across. Then Jacob comes back. Jacob comes back. And I want you to keep all these details of the Peshat, all these details of the simple flow of the story in mind, because they will inform us of the deeper teachings. All right, so he comes back after he gets his family safe and sound. And then when he comes back, he encounters this being, a divine being, a being that clearly has some connection to God, whether that's God himself, if you will, whether that's an angel God has sent in his stead. But he wrestles with this being all night and until daybreak. Jacob suffers a dislocated hip, but vanquishes the supernal creature, who then bestows upon him the name Israel. Okay, so Jacob gets a new name, but his new name is kind of unique in the Bible. It's really one of the only times in the Bible when someone gets a new name, but they continue to be called by the old name as well. Like after Abram becomes Abraham, he's never called Abram again. In fact, in Jewish tradition, if there is a name change, it's forbidden. It's forbidden to mention the old name. And Sarai never becomes, after she becomes Sarah, is never referred to as Sarai again. And Joshua, when he was originally Hosea, and his name gets changed, he's never called that again. And there's many more examples. Jacob is the only time where the Bible goes back and forth after the name change, which also clues us into some aspect of how to understand both of those names. So he gets this name Israel, which on its most simple level, its most basic level, the level that the text itself gives us, means to struggle with God or to struggle with the divine and prevail or live to tell about it, is how I like to say it. Like he wrestled with God and he lived to tell the story, right? That's kind of, in a nutshell, the most basic meaning of that name. But a little bit later on, I'll introduce you to at least two more understandings of that name. Jacob and Esau then meet, and they embrace, and they kiss. And we'll talk about that kiss as well. And then they part ways. Jacob purchases a plot of land near Shechem, whose crown prince, also named Shechem, abducts and rapes Jacob's daughter Dinah. Dinah's brothers, Simeon and Levi, two of the sons of the 12 sons of Jacob, of Israel, avenged the deed by killing all the male inhabitants of the city after rendering them vulnerable because they convinced them that they should be circumcised. And so they're kind of temporarily disabled and really aren't in the mood to fight after circumcising themselves. And Simeon and Levi used that as a way to get revenge for what was done to their sister. That'll be important to keep in mind in future portions, right before Jacob passes away and he gives his final blessings to his sons. Part of what happens here is why he says what he says to Simeon and Levi. Then Jacob journeys on. Rachel dies while giving birth to her second son, Benjamin. Her first son was Joseph. And so Rachel is then buried on the roadside in a roadside grave near the town of Bethlehem. Reuben then loses his birthright as the firstborn, which means the one who is worthy and deserving of a double portion of inheritance because he is interfering with his father's life and his marital life and his father's business. And so Jacob then arrives in the city of Hebron. The city that Abraham, remember, purchased the cave of Machpelah to bury Sarah in, and where Abraham is buried. And there he returns to Hebron. He sees his father Isaac, who later dies at the age of 180 years old. And then Rebekah had passed away, his mom, before his arrival. Then the portion concludes with a very detailed account of Esau and his wives, his children, his grandchildren, and the people and the history of the people of Seir, among whom Esau settled. And so there is a list of 8 kings who ruled Edom, the land of Esau and Seir's descendants. And so that kind of wraps up what's in the portion Vayishlach. So with that, I kind of just want to zoom in on some of the verses and some of the things going on there. And this week, for whatever reason, I thought I just kind of, as I pray about it and study and think about what word from the Lord from this week's portion may be good for you to hear, or that I feel compelled through the Spirit to share with you. A couple of just little small details, I think, that are interesting for you. Hopefully just let you know the beauty of the Torah, the beauty of the scroll of the Torah, and also appreciate some of the liturgical aspects that go along with good, proper worship of our God. And as well as when we get to the naming of Israel, there I will be the captain on the airplane and tell you to buckle your seat because you're about to hit turbulence, but we'll get there soon enough. So I want to first look at this passage from Genesis 32, verse 11. So let's read that together. I have become small from all the kindnesses and from all the truth that you have rendered your servant. For with my staff I've crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 camps. And you'll notice I have emphasized those kind of first 4 words in the English translation. I have become small. It's really only 1 word in the Hebrew, but it is 4 words in English. And I want to talk about that. So this particular statement from Genesis 32, verse 11, is part of Jacob's plea to God that God would protect him from his brother Esau, who was coming to meet him with 400 men as Jacob is preparing to re-enter the land of Israel with his family after that 20-year absence. So that's part of his practical preparation, right? Something that we we all know when what we would give advice to someone before they're about to do something really big in their life, before they're about to do something that's life-changing not only for themselves but for their entire family, before they enter into something that's risky or dangerous, we would tell them, you need to pray about that, right? You need to pray. And so Jacob does that, and this is part of that prayer that he says to God. He's acknowledging to God. God has been gracious to him, has been full of kindness to him, it's a really important word with Jacob, and that is the word truth. Jacob throughout Scripture is connected with the Hebrew word emet, which means truth. And he's saying, you've given me this truth, you've given me so much, and there you have that staff. Now, what do you think of when you hear the word staff and crossing a body of water? What do you think of? Right? You think of like Moses using a staff, right, to cross like later on, or holding up the staff, when we get into the book of Exodus, right? But here you're already seeing a foreshadowing of this idea of the power of the staff. And there's actually a nice messianic shadow there because the Hebrew word for staff is also the Hebrew word for cross. And so it's really powerful when you read through the Old Testament. Anytime you encounter the word staff, and if you just in your mind substitute that with cross because it's the same word, you begin to see like, wow, there's like the power of the cross, right? That all these things were happening through this cross. And so that's there. So Jacob is realizing all of this. He's praying to God, and now he's wanting this protection. All right. The thing to know about the Torah, though, is that like how we just read that verse together, whenever the Torah is in the synagogue or whenever it was stood in the temple, whenever it was read like later on by people like Ezra and Nehemiah, whenever Solomon would have heard it read in the temple after it was constructed under his reign and so forth, the Torah is always sung. It's not spoken. It is sung. And the thing about that is, while someone could be creative and create their own melodies for it, the Torah itself has its own melodies, and it even has its own musical notations right there on the text. If you look at what's called a Masoretic text of the Hebrew, it'll have all of these slashes and lines and things going on. Those are all what are known as cantillation marks. Those are the marks for the cantor, the one who would be chanting the Torah, and they give just like what we would expect in our musical notation. It'll tell you when to speed up. It'll tell you when to slow down. It'll tell you what's a high note. It'll tell you to go low. It'll tell you to run kind of a scale up, or it'll tell you to run a scale down. It'll tell you that this is supposed to be melancholy, that this is supposed to be a minor key, that this is supposed to be joyous, and this should be in a major key. It'll tell you that this is shifting. All of that's encoded in there, and this is what's really important for us to know, is that those melodies are part of how we are supposed to interpret the text, because they give us interpretation clues, right? If you're watching a movie and you're just watching a scene and you don't know really what's going to happen, you just all of a sudden it's a scene and there's a family on the couch and they're playing a game and they're having a good time, but all of a sudden in the background there's a deep, dark song or melody in a minor key, right? And even kind of have some banging on some of the deeper notes in the piano. You begin to realize that even though you're seeing the individuals having a good time, you know because of the music what? Something not fun's about to happen, and they're oblivious to it, right? And then you get tense, right? It helps you interpret the scene. It helps get your emotions right. The Torah is written that way. The Torah is written that way. It comes with musical notation that are interpretive guides. This is part of what Jesus meant when he was teaching in the Sermon on the Mount, again, when he talks about all the jots and the tittles of the text. Those cantillation marks are jots and tittles. They give us the interpretation many times. And Jesus said those are just as inspired as anything else, because they won't pass away either. They are part of that eternal Word of God. So why do I tell you all this about the musical notes? Because when we consider this and we consider the context, here, Jacob's fearing that he's literally about to die, right? His brother is honking mad. He's now feels like he's been ripped off. He's going to take it out on his brother. He's coming with an army. Esau, with this reputation of being this killer, this hunter, this man of the world, this man of physicality, this man of material, this man of ego, is after Jacob. And Jacob knows what's coming. That, if you would think in the soundtrack, this would be like crazy intense music. If you were putting this in a movie and you had Jacob praying these words as he's literally hearing the footsteps of these soldiers coming for him, you would think that would be very, very intense. This is the Hebrew word that gets translated, I've become small. Some English translation puts it as unworthy. I like become small because the Hebrew word katan means little, small. All right, but kantoni is how you pronounce it. If you look at kantoni, you will see on the top of those letters, right? Do you see that one kind of like squiggly mark that takes like a right turn, right? That's a cantillation mark. That is actually a notation that if you were the singer of the Torah, that's a notation for you to do something. All right, and that particular note, I listed it for you on your handout, is called the Azla Garish, right? So like we may, if you know music, are familiar with something like an eighth note or a minor scale run or, what's the Italian or Latin word for like speed it up, right? Or slow it down. If you know what a score kind of looks like, you would know that kind of language. That's an Azla Garish. That's a very technical musical term. And where in this text we would expect it to go down to kind of indicate Jacob's sense of existential lowliness and his humbleness, right? He's talking about that. He's been made low. He's been reduced. He's humbled. You would expect the music to represent that. But the note, the Azla Garish, is an uplifting note. It's an inspiring note that causes you to dramatically run up this major scale, right? And so that's where the person chanting the Torah would hit the note, and then they would dramatically and very like full of energy run up the scale and get much louder and try to elevate you. So how does this help us interpret the verse then? The musical notation here is teaching us that it's not unrestrained ego or arrogance that elevates a person's spirit, but rather it is sincere teshuvah. It's sincere repentance. It's the gospel message. It's returning to God. It is returning to God, the sense of humility, this sense of gratitude, this sense of being made small is how we find true elevation in our spirit. It's where we find true strength, that going smaller and being made small is actually what lifts us up. Again, which is so Sermon on the Mount. When you look at those Beatitudes, right? What things are blessed? They're the exact opposite of what we would probably value as blessed or awesome or happy. Blessed are, happy are those who mourn. Happy, blessed are those who hunger and thirst. Happy and blessed are those, who are persecuted, who have people speak about them negatively, right? Sermon on the Mount, Jesus saying all these things that reduce our ego, all of these things that humble us, all of these things that cause us to turn and see our God and who we are in His light and all of the goodness that He's given to us. This is what uplifts us. This is what blessedness is. This is what happiness is. And so that's what's being expressed musically in Genesis 32, verse 11. This is what truly raises one's spirit and brings real and lasting joy and encouragement. And this is where Jacob is going to get further encouragement to be able to face what he does that evening when he goes to wrestle with the divine being. So I wanted to share that with you because I just wanted you to see that extra dimension of the Torah that you may not have been aware of, and that is that it is sung. And what, just kind of a little bit of an excursus, but related to that is absolutely fascinating, is that the Gospel of, well, all of them, but it was done specifically with the Gospel of Mark. The Gospel of Mark is horrible Greek. It's absolutely atrocious Greek. If you know Greek and you're a Greek student, it's bad, right? It's readable and all that, but it's like, you know, a sixth grader wrote a term paper the night before it was due, right? You can read it and you know what's going on, but you're just like, man, like there's a lot of run-ons and there's a lot of split infinitives. There's a lot of not good stuff going on here, right? That's the way the Greek flows. But if you translate it word for word and don't rearrange the word order, don't do any monkey business whatsoever, but you literally go word for word from the Greek into the Hebrew, it makes beautiful, poetic Hebrew. And my rabbi, when he was in Jerusalem, that fascinated him. And so he actually worked with a Christian pastor who was a Greek and Hebrew scholar. And what they found was that in the Greek manuscripts of Mark, it's divided into sections, even numbered. And they're the same number of sections that the Torah is divided up into. Like how we're reading a section each week, you know? Mark has that many divisions. And now, do you think that's a coincidence? Probably not. So where my rabbi and his Christian pastor and professor at Hebrew University went with this was makes perfect Hebrew, and it's divided into the sections of the Torah, and each section links thematically with that week's Torah portion. So like when you're in Noah, the portion of Noach, you know, you're talking about the flood and the waters and the dove. That's the baptism of Jesus portion of Mark, where there's a dove descending on Jesus. And you're like, wow. I mean, every one of them has these connections. And they're like, this was the early church's, if you will, commentary on the Torah. That Mark took the life of Jesus and said, he's the Word made flesh. Therefore, if we write a biography about him, and he's the Word made flesh, he should fit perfectly into all of these divisions. And so the early church would continue to read the Torah portion, and then they would read from the life of Jesus that tied in to that Torah portion. But here was this kicker for me, and it's the sinker. The final piece was, well, what happens if we take that beautiful Hebrew and we laid it over the Torah melodies? And guess what? Every one of them could be sung to that week's Torah melody. Now, what is the chances of all of that happening, right? But it's beautiful. And again, that's where understanding like that the Torah is meant to be sung gave further insight into like the whole notion that the early community of Jesus followers were still following the Torah, and they were still reading the weekly Torah portions. But then they were also adding onto it how Jesus filled those full, even to the point that you could sing the life of Jesus. I just think that's mind-blowing and just a dimension to the Torah that is so amazing. So I just wanted to share that with you. All right, so let's keep going in the text. Let's look at Genesis 32, verse 22. As I kind of reviewed this, sometimes I thought, even though I knew what I was saying, I'm not sure I conveyed what I was saying very good, or very well. So one of the things the Torah also loves to do, because it's Hebraic literature, one of the things Hebraic literature loves to do is word plays. So in English, we're used to like poetry rhyming, right? That's a very common way you kind of know it's a poem. And we also have other things that identify it as poetry, like A, B, B, A, and, you know, different. We know a poem when we see it, or at least 9 times out of 10, We know a poem when we see it. But those same rules that make a poem in English literature or American literature a poem are not the same rules that make a poem in other cultures or languages. Hebrew doesn't rhyme. Hebrew could care less about rhyming. If Hebrew ever rhymes, it is an absolute coincidence. They never, ever attempt to rhyme. But what they do instead is word plays. Words that sound alike but have opposite meanings, or words that are so close that you're kind of twisting and turning them, and just real fun with words. And of course, that's hard to catch when it gets translated. So again, I wanted you to get a flavor of the Torah, the beauty of the Torah, the art of the Torah. That so much of it is not written like narrative, historical narrative style, but is written in just wonderful, wonderful poetic prose. And word plays are one of those. And the word play also allows you to get a deeper meaning to what's going on. Right? That's part of why you do it. And so in this particular verse, there are some word plays going on this whole portion. So that's what I'm going to be trying to explain to you, all right? So it's just the beauty of the word play. And then what shifts when these two words are close, but noticing what's different about them. What we're supposed to pick up on is now, oh, isn't that cute that these two words almost sound alike and they were in the same sentence? And doesn't that, make like my sermon on Sunday, I had the 3 P's, right? There's preparation, there's purpose, and then there's provision, right? It's not just that they're supposed to pop off our mouth like that, but when we notice, ooh, this one has a letter A, but this one, instead of a letter A, it's the same word except it has an O. What's the connection between O and A, right? That's what it invites you to explore, and that's where you get the next level of meaning. That's Hebrew poetry, all right? So this has that. So that's what I'm trying to explain, and I hope when we're done, I've done that, all right? So let's read this verse together. Genesis chapter 32, verse 22. Let's read. The same night he arose and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Yabok. All right, and that'll be the Jabbok in English Bibles. But I wanted to keep it Y there because it's part of the wordplay. These are all kind of words that begin with the Yah sound, right, related to Jacob's name. So I wanted you to see that that's what that was. So here we are. Jacob is preparing for his confrontation with Esau in the portion. Jacob takes his wives, his children, and he takes them to safety on the other side of the Jabbok stream. Jacob crosses over a stream named Jabbok ingeniously, and then he comes back. Now, do you remember like way back in the portion, Lech Lecha, I think it was, and I told you the meaning of the name Hebrew. It comes from Ivrit. You remember what a Hebrew was? It wasn't an ethnicity. It wasn't about genetic codes. It wasn't about DNA. A Hebrew is one who did what? Crossed over, right? And then we talked about that's not just literally crossing over streams and borders, but it also implies a spiritual crossing, an elevation, right? So a Hebrew is one who's making these crossing overs, right? And so you'll notice in this text, in this section, there's mentioned several times this root word that has to do with crossing over or being a Hebrew, an Ivrit. And so Jacob crosses over and he comes back, and what's really being hinted at in the wordplay is that he's undergoing an inner struggle. It's really about an inner struggle, which, well, for us, you and I, when we want to know where does the rubber hit the road with this portion, it's going to help us with our inner struggle, right? So this week, part of its spiritual energy, its spiritual technology is to help you with inner struggles. So be prepared to be honest about what are your inner struggles. Be prepared to write them down or list them or confess them or say them out loud and face them. But it's about an inner struggle that Jacob undergoes when he encounters this individual, this divine being, this angel, and wrestles with him. This inner struggle is beautifully alluded to in the wordplay of 4 Hebrew words. Specifically, how the letters in these Hebrew words kind of tell a story. The letters that are in common, the letters that are different. Those tell a story. The 4 words that we're going to be looking at, and they're on your sheet as well, is Yaakov, which is Jacob, Yabuk, which is Jabuk, Yavek, which is wrestled, and then Teka, which is struck, when he gets struck, right? So those are the 4 words, Yaakov, Yabuk, Yavek, and Teka, because they're all kind of coming from a very similar root. Hopefully, even just if you don't know Hebrew, just looking at them, you can kind of just look at the characters and kind of see they're sharing certain things in common, but they're also adding things, all right? So those are the 4 words we're going to look at, because from a poetic point of view, these are intentionally kind of being wordplay. Like if you were to hear this sung, or even hear this whole thing fully read out in Hebrew, even if you didn't speak the language, you would catch the play on words. You would catch it. So here, the Torah is using these 4 similarly spelled words to convey this short story. So I wanted to tell you the story first, then go back and tell you how we got the story. The story is this. Jacob crossed over the Jabbok, and he wrestled a being who struck him. When he realized that he could not overpower him, Jacob's wrestling match that night really was taking place on many different levels simultaneously, including internally, and that's the one we're going to focus on. He was struggling internally. In order to defeat Esau, and in many ways, the so-called ghost of Esau, like this is one of those things, have you ever done something in your past? Have you ever treated someone horribly, like 20 years ago in college, or maybe in elementary school, you bullied somebody, and then later in life, you just feel like complete garbage for doing that, right? That ghost, or if you will, of the past kind of haunts you, right? Jacob is internally struggling with this, he didn't have the best relationship with his brother Esau, right? We learned that in last week's reading, and it didn't end well. And so he has a lot of internal struggle with that. Probably some guilt, probably some shame, probably some would-have, should-haves, could-haves, probably a whole lot of things, just like you probably have with some relationship in your past, where you said something you shouldn't have, where you did something you wished you would not have done, where you acted a way you wished you would not have acted, and you're kind of carrying that baggage with you. Jacob, one of the struggles he's having, one of the things he's wrestling with is this internal struggle. In order to defeat Esau, and really the ghost of Esau and the power of Esau that it has over him, the struggle that he had with Esau, all of that, in order to defeat Esau the next day, not just in a military battle, Jacob knows this is on a spiritual level. He knew he had to come to terms once and for all with his own sense of identity, his own sense of being, his insecurity surrounding his birthright, the blessing that he took from Esau, and ultimately, what is his purpose and destiny in this world as the one who now is the keeper of the covenant that went from Abraham to Isaac to him, and who is now to give it to the next generation? What does that mean, and how is he going to do it? These are all the things Jacob is wrestling with. Jacob's crossing of the Jabbok symbolized when he comes back by himself, right? He takes his family across and he comes back alone. It symbolizes his need to delve deep within himself to conjure up the internal strength necessary to face Esau one more time. He had to overcome his insecurities, increase his inner strength. The Hebrew letters in the word Jabbok, which is on your sheet, are almost the same as those in the word for Jacob, Yaakov. You can look at that and you can see, right? They're almost the same. The two would have been exactly the same except for this. The letter ayin is missing from Yebuk. It's in Jacob, but it's not in Yebuk. This lack symbolizes Jacob's need to fill an internal void to complete himself as an individual. As I said, you may recall from our portion of Lech Lecha, the word Hebrew, to be a Hebrew person, comes from the Hebrew word ivrit, to cross over, related to Abraham's ability to overcome obstacles, to cross over to new levels of spiritual insight and maturity. In our portion, this very same root, to cross over, is used twice in this small space. Once to describe Jacob crossing the Yebuk, and once in the phrase, the Yebuk stream. Thus, there seems to be a deep connection here between Abraham's ability to overcome obstacles and Jacob preparing to confront Esau. In your toolbox, it's in your handbook, that's a verbal tally. It's a very important word. I think we would all agree the word Hebrew is an important word for the Hebrew Bible, right? And the Hebrew people and the Hebrew culture. It might behoove us to know what the word Hebrew means. And we saw the very first time it was used in the Bible. In your handout, your handbook, the law of firsts. And it's used in the first times in conjunction with Abraham being able to overcome obstacles by crossing over. And now that word that was used exclusively for Abraham in that ended up earning his descendants that title, is now being used for Jacob, which is therefore linking the two conceptually. And so Jacob is now being linked to Abraham's ability to not only overcome obstacles, but to elevate spiritually, to mature spiritually. Now, I'm going to give you a quote from the Zohar that comments on this verse. This is a quote from the Zohar. It's commenting on Genesis 22, verse 4, that says, "On the third day, Abraham lifted up his eyes and he saw the place from afar." It's back at the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. He looks up on the third day and he sees he sees that place at Moriah that he's supposed to take Isaac. The Zohar says this: "This verse describes Abraham sighting the place where he's to offer up Isaac. The third day, though, actually refers to Jacob, the third of the patriarchs, and from afar alludes to the state of prophecy that although Abraham was commanded to take Isaac and sacrifice him, Abraham was prophetically able to foresee Isaac's unborn son at the time, Jacob, continuing the covenant." Of course, ultimately, God tells Abraham not to sacrifice Isaac, and his vision of Jacob is realized. And so we can conjecture that Jacob's ability to cross over the Yebuk and ultimately go beyond his limitations is something he has spiritually inherited from his grandfather, Abraham. The Hebrew word for wrestled, as you see on your handout, contains the same letters as Jacob, right? These are all word plays on the name Yaakov, Jacob. Except the letter ayin in Jacob has been exchanged for a letter aleph. Always significant in the Torah when ayin and aleph are involved. The missing letter ayin in the word Yebuk is realized within Jacob, but transformed into an aleph during this battle on this fateful night. The letter aleph numerically equals 1, representing the unity, the purpose of Jacob, that he needed to defeat his foe. The letter ayin equals 70, the exact number of souls that later accompany Jacob down into Egypt. Jacob wrestling with this man represents his struggle to attain the inner certainty that he was able and worthy to accomplish everything that God had promised him in the covenant given to Abraham and Isaac. And then finally, there's that fourth word, the Hebrew word for he struck him, tekah. It contains only 2 letters from Jacob's name and reveals a deep psychological truth. Whenever we do battle, whether with external forces or with internal forces, our own voice, our own past, or with both, we don't walk away unscathed from the encounter. Even when we are victorious, there are inevitably wounds to take with us. And whether the wounds come in the form of cutting words or suspicions aroused or guilt experienced or raw emotions exposed, every victory has a price to pay. The trick is to learn to take the things in stride and shrug off the negative. The Torah explicitly mentions that Jacob was wounded. But shortly it recounts that Jacob came, and I quote, whole. W-H-O-L-E. Even though it says he was wounded and he had a limp and this was with him, it then says he came whole, complete, perfect to the city of Shechem. It means he was able to shrug off the injury, to heal, and to remain unhampered by it. So the similarity of these four words that allude to Jacob's struggle is a profound example of how there are many dimensions to the Torah that come from the subtleties of the Hebrew language. Again, how I want to do things like this is because and I've quoted it many times and I'll keep quoting it, I want you to truly understand what Jesus meant in Matthew 5 when he told his disciples, not one jot or tittle will pass away. Or when he was on the road in the end of the Gospel of Luke, when he was there with two of his own disciples. They were described as disciples, folks. They should have recognized Jesus. They were followers. They had listened to him. They knew him, but they were prevented from recognizing him. And what does it say that Jesus did? That he opened up the scriptures to them, and he opened up their minds and showed how all of the scriptures were about him, and he revealed these deeper teachings. When you read that, you instinctively know he had to teach more than the Sunday school level of just repeating the stories. This is the kind of depth he would have went into with them. These are the tools that he would have used. These are the tools that these disciples would have been taught when they were growing up and when they were being taught how to read the Bible. This was how they did it, and this is how Jesus would have explained the scriptures to them. And so if no other experience, the experience of knowing what a first century Galilean disciple would have heard when Jesus truly opened up a text to them. And I think, again, that's just a beautiful thing. And in the midst of it, hopefully there's a nugget or two in there for you. So Jacob now gets a new name. Attention passengers, we're about to hit turbulence. Please buckle up your seatbelts. All right, you thought the previous one was bumpy. All right, so we're going to read together Genesis 32. It's verses 25 through 28. So let's read together. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he touched his hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day has broken." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." And he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then he said, "Your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with men and have prevailed." And so there, even with God and with men, or with man, you now know why there's a debate. Is this being divine or a man, right? Boom. The text gives you the ambiguity. So it's both. It's both and, right? But here is the famous renaming of Jacob to Israel. So, what is this really about? At a deeper level, Jacob's journey is following the course of the ego's development. Okay? That's what it is at a deeper level. It's not just a historical story about a dude named Jacob that had these experiences. Yes, it is that. Yes, it's the inspired word of God. Yes, it's historical. But it's also archetypal. Otherwise, something that happened to a dude 4,000 years ago may be fascinating to hear, but probably doesn't impact my life in the 21st century in Macomb, Michigan. But if it's archetypal, And it represents different things that are embedded in each and every one of us, and every part of each and every one of our souls, and our minds, and our psyches, and our emotions. Then I can tap into it and connect with it. So at a deeper level, Jacob's journey follows the course of your ego's development. Due to the nature of the physical embodiment, the soul, when it's placed into a human body, has to deal with things like the helplessness of an infant. And so the ego emerges as a necessary response to the basic challenges of life, of having to squeeze a vast soul, a divine soul, into a very particular and limited form called your skin suit. The small self, which the Torah calls Jacob, your small self, which the Torah calls Jacob, is sent on a journey to rediscover what your essential nature is, to rediscover your soul. Your ego is a protective measure, and it's not all bad. Don't ever think it's all bad. Your ego is what allows you to be competitive, and being competitive isn't all negative. Being competitive is what allows you sometimes to get the job you need to get, or the ego is what allows you to, or motivates you, or pushes you to protect your family, or to provide for your family, or to take care of yourself, or to take care of the things that have been entrusted to you, right? It's not all bad to have this physicality striving. It's when it's unchecked and so forth that it gets messed up. But that's Jacob that's being represented here. But Jacob is wanting to discover who he really is. Name change always means essence change, or reveals the essence. And remember, Jacob doesn't become Israel full time. He goes back and forth between Jacob and Israel, which means these are two levels of his soul. Right? And so here, we're seeing Jacob discover who he really is. What's his soul? Why was he sent into this world? Who am I underneath my skin suit? This mysterious thing called my soul, my identity, that invisible thing. How do I get to know it? Because you'll be amazed how many people do not know their soul, and that is why they are so confused about everything in life. They don't know their soul. Their soul doesn't know their body. Jacob is on this journey, and this week our energy is to connect to that Jacob in us. You ever struggle with God? Probably you have. Probably you have. You've probably at one time or another had an issue with God, or struggled with Him, or struggled understanding Him, or struggled for His purpose, or struggled understanding His purpose. Well, do you want to learn how to struggle with God and prevail and move to the level of Israel? That's this week's portion for you. Jacob, as ego, is the wheeler dealer, employing every manipulation to get what he needs to survive. It's not always bad to try to survive, but that's Jacob, that's ego. How can I wheel and deal? How can I get what I want? How can I get what I need? How can I get the birthright? How can I be the man? How can I get the inheritance? How can I be the one? On the journey home, back to the land of Israel, back to the land of the soul, there comes a point where all the manipulations of the ego become useless and irrelevant, which many people can discover in life, that trying to be number one all the time only gets you so far before it gets you nowhere. And one must eventually stand naked and vulnerable before the truth. In that moment, it is possible to receive the blessing of a closer identity with who your soul is, allowing greater access to God, your Creator, your purpose in this world, and open the doors to a deeper level of yourself. As Jacob journeys home, meaning to his soul, to his true self. So much of what we believe about ourselves or others is false. It's a false narrative we've taught ourselves. We tell ourselves all kinds of false narratives about what really matters and what's really important, and we buy into that false self. Jacob coming home is coming home to his true self. And so his past deceptions, they're haunting him. And he must confront his own twin brother. It's no coincidence it's a twin. He's confronting himself. The one he had so cruelly treated and desperately fears. Jacob's fear is multiplied by guilt and shame about being such kind of like a con man, a grasper of the heel. All his manipulations have only strengthened his false self. And that false self must shore itself up with defenses, for it projects the only reality that the ego knows. So before meeting Esau, who embodies Jacob's past kind of catching up with him and Jacob coming to terms with who he is, Jacob, as the ego shoring up the false self, does everything possible to ensure his survival. That's what we talked about, right? He prays, he bribes with sending bribes to Esau. He sends men to Esau. He gathers intelligence. He prepares, as the text says, a strategy of escape in the event that the battle goes south. Right? He does all of these things. Finally, after all of these manipulations, the text says Jacob is alone. Right? His family's gone. He comes back alone. All night, Jacob alone wrestles with a mystery. All his cunning and defenses are wrested from him that night, and he is held in the grip of truth as layers of his false self gradually fall away, revealing at the break of dawn his soul's true hidden radiance, his true potential, his true self. He is Israel. All through the dark night, we wrestle until our wrestling can become a dance. And the dance can become an embrace. And at the dawn, the embrace calls for a blessing, where we are given a new name, and a name that represents our true essence. Our new name is the call of the soul. It is the level of Israel. So who am I beneath my personality? Who was there before birth and will survive my physical deterioration and even my death? Who is that? Who is that for you? Who were you before you were born, and who will you be after your body is in the ground, but yet you're not gone? Who is that? Do you know that being? By identifying with that aspect of existence, which is eternal, we can begin to let our personality be shaped and refined by the power, the wisdom, and the perspective of our soul, which is our true self, who we were created by God to truly be, not just right here and right now, though certainly that, but always. The blessing of that dark night on the banks of the river Yabok is the name we receive, a true name that signifies and holds our essence. It calls forth for true power and sends us forth on our path. So even after Jacob receives the blessing of his new name, Israel, a reminder of his true soul's identity, notice I said he's still called Jacob, the only one in the Bible like that. For the rest of the story, he's called by both names. And in fact, later on in the Torah, when we'll eventually get there, he's given a third name, Yeshurun, which is an even higher level than Israel. And he's only called Yeshurun a few times, and I think once in the Psalms he's referred to as Yeshurun. But when the Psalms will talk about like so-and-so and so-and-so Jacob, so-and-so Israel, don't fall into the trap of English literature going, well, they're writing poetry, and he couldn't say Jacob twice, so he had to be creative. Jacob's kind of like Israel, so he... No, the line that's talking about Jacob is talking about a level of the soul, a lower level. And then the supposed parallel line is about what's true of the elevated soul that is in tune with its true self, and that is Israel. The fact that he's called Jacob and Israel interchangeably for the rest of the scriptures is to teach us that even after moments of profound awakening and spiritual experiences, we can oftentimes slip back into the habitual manipulation of our ego. Even as we awaken to the power of the soul, we find ourselves tangled in the web that our ego has woven. And so Jacob's sons continue his pattern of deception. Even as Israel, he must deal with the legacy of his past. The spiritual challenge is to anchor ourselves when we receive glimpses of our soul, of who we truly are, to hold on to them, and from such points, remember them and use them when we face challenges in front of us, so that we act righteously and respond from our soul's wisdom and not from our ego's protection of itself. The name Israel is often understood to mean one who struggles with God and prevails, and we see that in the text. You can also find, and there's good information on that, I'll trust you can find as many sources as you like on that. But I want to make you aware of at least two more meanings of Israel. One I'm just going to mention quickly. Israel can be seen to come from two root words in Hebrew. Yasher, Y-A-S-H-E-R, Yasher, and El, which means straight to God. Yasher El. The Rabash, who was a teacher of my teacher, the Rabash would teach his students the following to explain the meaning of Israel, the name. One who wishes to go by the path of the Creator is called Yasher El, Israel, which broken down means Yasher, straight, La'el, to God, meaning that he wants everything that he does to go straight to his Creator and does not wish to have any other aim in life other than union with God. That everything he does is straight to God, is in complete alignment with God. And the Rabash says when we reach this level of spirituality, then we can say we have become Israel, or to have arrived in the land of Israel. So that's one other meaning of it, straight to God. And that's Jacob in that match, got aligned with God, got aligned with himself, and had this unity with God. But I want to give you a fun one. I think it was 2012 when I was in Israel, and I was in the northern Galilee in a town called Sfat. And I'd always heard about this individual. It's not a pizza shop because he's from Yemen, the country Yemen, and he makes like Yemenite food, but it's kind of like what I would describe as Yemenite pizza. It's like this type of bread, and it has sauces and cheese and all this stuff, but it's not pizza, but it's like the Yemenite pizzeria is kind of like the joke we had that was in town about it. But he was known to be like this insanely wise rabbi who just made Yemenite food. So I went to eat at his restaurant, and by the way, he gave me a super cool hat too, that I still have. And we started talking about like he had a lot of hyssop that he put on food. So I asked him like, well, what's the spiritual significance of hyssop? And we got into all this discussion, and somehow along through all of that, we ended up on a discussion of Jacob and the name change to Israel. And this is what he taught me, and it fits the story so beautifully. And this, again, in your handbook in the Hebraic toolbox, one of those tools is gematria, the use of numbers. So in Hebrew, the name Jacob, Yaakov, if you add up the letters, because letters are numbers in Hebrew, if you add up those 4 letters in Hebrew, they equal 182. If you take the word Satan, which really means the adversary, which really means, in a lot of contexts, your ego, your pride, your evil inclination, if we use church speak, your sinful nature, all right? That's Satan, the adversarial voice, not necessarily the being. It's just the adversarial voice. You have it in your head all the time, every day. You add up those three letters, it equals 359, which on a side note is just one more than Messiah, which is a nice little spiritual teaching in and of itself. But when I add 182 to 359, I get 541, which is what the name Israel equals. And so my Yemenite pizza maker friend, new friend, said, that's what Israel is, and that's how he became Israel. Whenever you face your own adversary, whenever you face the evil inclination, whenever you face your negativity, whenever you face your false self, and you prevail, you've made it to Israel. And when I tell you that, because you need to keep that in mind as you read from this point on in the Torah, you see a different Jacob. You see a completely different Jacob/Israel. Because this is someone who's gone to battle, and that's who the real battle was with. The Satan. And he overcame. And he became Israel. 182 plus 359 equals 541. So those are a couple of additional meanings to the name Israel that you may not have heard. I know of at least 5 more, but we won't cover those tonight. All right? Come back next year. I'll close now, even though we're a little late, but this won't take long, with a jot and tittle, because I always leave you hanging with jots and tittles. So when Jacob left home, his brother Esau wanted to kill him because he took the blessing, at least from his perspective, even though Esau sold it. But from his perspective now, it was taken from him, the blessing of their father Isaac. And years later, when they finally meet, the night after Jacob wrestles with the angel, the Torah describes this meeting. So let's read this verse together. Esau ran toward Jacob, embraced him, fell upon his neck, and kissed him. And there they wept. There is, if you look at the Hebrew scroll, the word for kissed him is vayishakahu. Now there's a good word right there, right? Vayishakahu. But you don't have to know Hebrew, but what do you notice on vayishakahu on the top? Dots. Hebrew words and letters don't have dots over them. And there's only a tiny number of times this occurs in the entire Hebrew Bible. And this is one of them. So what do these dots mean? This is a jot and a tittle. Now, Rashi explains that there is a difference of opinion among the sages concerning the meaning of these dots. And as we know from our Hebraic toolbox, whenever there's a thesis and an antithesis, which one is true? Well, they're both true, but yet only when we find the synthesis, right? It's where the sum of the parts are greater than the individual whole put together, right? And that's one of the tools. But the opinions are, first, the dots indicate that Esau was not sincere when he kissed Jacob. In fact, in the Midrash, it describes that he tried to bite him like a vampire. But then Rashi brings the opinion of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who says that although it is an immutable fact that Esau hates Jacob, in this particular case, Esau's compassion for his brother was truly aroused, and he actually kissed him with all of his heart. So which is it? It's both, or more so, it's the synthesis. The series of dots above this word in the Torah and this verse are to be understood to allude to the fact that Esau was conflicted on how to relate to his brother after all of these years. In some way, he wanted to kill him. And in other ways, he wanted to love him and embrace him. It lets us know that Esau was having conflicted emotions so that we're able to read beyond just the text. Know that even though this is what has happened, Esau is terribly conflicted about it, which we probably can understand. And maybe you've experienced that yourself, right? Where you've had a bad time with a family member and you're going to bury the hatchet, so to speak, you shake the hand or you hug, but in the back of your head, you're like, I don't know, right? Those are the dots, letting us know Esau really did feel it. He wasn't being fake, but he was like hug turning into like bear hug to squeeze him to kill him, to let it go, right? Those are the dots there. All right. Well, we will close there since I have kept you long. So we will meet next week for the 9th portion of the Torah. We will be back in the chapel. Let's close with the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai noten haTorah. Blessed are you, Lord God, the giver of the Torah. Amen. Shalom, shalom. Go in peace.